A franchise is an interesting thing because it can come to own you if you're not careful, right? Like it can define you. It's scary and risky and kind of crazy to walk away from a very successful franchise.
City where the artist would not fear censor, where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small. And with the sweat of your brow, rapture can become your city as well.
You know him from incredible games like System Shock, Bioshock Infinite, and the upcoming game Judas. Ladies and gentlemen, the legendary game director, Ken Levine. It's an honor to sit down with you. I'm really, really excited to talk to you about your career, video games, all the cool stuff you've worked on. Was there a game that you played growing up that made you say, I want to write games? Like, was it, like, I know you were writing before you were writing for games specifically, but was there a one, you rolled credits, you stood up and you're like, man, I gotta write a video game?
I don't think I even occurred to me until almost right time I got in the games industry that that was an option. Like I remember reading an article about Looking Glass like a year before I got a job there. But it never occurred to me, I never made the connection until I saw like an ad for a job there in Next Gen, if you remember Next Gen magazine.
Yeah.
That you could do that. And so, no, I never really thought about it. I mean, there was a game called Ultima Underworld.
We were attacked. Goblins and worse, my lord.
Which was the sort of moment where I realized, that I saw emergence happen, emergent behavior or emergent events happening in a game. Because if people don't know that game, RPGs at the time were sort of very much like wizardry. You would sort of move a square at a time. And there are a lot of new indie games that live in that space where you're just moving like a block square at a time. But the problem with those games is there's no emergence can happen because no events can accidentally bump into each other. And I played this game, Ultima Underworld. It's like, now it would seem like bog standard. It's first person, explore the environment in 3D. I was in an encounter with like some goblins or something, and they were beating me, so I started to run away. And normally in a game like Wizardry, you'd say run away, and it would just move you to a different square, and the enemies would be gone, essentially. Here, they were chasing me, and I was running away from them, and I think then I turned a corner, and there was like a giant spider showed up. And all of a sudden, there was a fight between the goblins and me and the spider. Maybe they didn't like each other too, I can't remember. And all of a sudden, I had an event that I knew nobody else had ever had exactly that same event. And that lit something in me about, at least that's the kind of game I want to play, and then eventually became the kind of game I want to make.
I love that because I feel like you just laid down the building blocks so much of what I think people know you from. Taking a bunch of systems and overlapping them and creating these like beautiful chaotic moments and creating this kind of dynamic storytelling that I think a lot of people don't realize that is happening to them in a very special way that might not be happening to somebody else.
Every game is, for the individual player, linear, right? Because you take, even if it has a million choices like Baldur's Gate or something, you are still going through one path. So it's hard, without comparing your experience to other people, to see how divergent things can become. It's hard to do, that kind of thing, to make that kind of openness. I never want to be the person who says the future of games is this, because like I make a certain type of game and different people make other types of games, and it's great because like I'm never going to make, I think I'm pronouncing it Balacho, and that guy's got a different goal, but he's got a great goal, right? Which is to make an amazing, roguelike poker game. The goal for me is eventually like, how do you remove the barriers so you can just sort of be the person and improvise, in the game and feel that you have that kind of agency, and the world will sort of shift around you. And it's a really hard problem.
Look, Mr. Bubbles, it's an angel.
You worked on Bioshock, then Bioshock Infinite, and that at the time it felt like the single, like story-driven, narrative-driven single-player games were the future. It feels like a lot of that storytelling started happening more in multiplayer, right? A lot of these, like, there are people that just check in every single day on like the same 2 or 3 games, and they're having those kind of moments in Fortnite, and some of those systems are overlapping. Do you think that one will ever truly cannibalize the other, or there's space for all those things to exist?
Cool thing about multiplayer is the stories are less specific, right? There's not like usually a big story unfolding, but you make your own stories, right?
Right.
Hey, remember that time we were doing this and that guy came in and he shot me in the head and then you got revenge. It is more complicated and more expensive to make that kind of single player story thing. And obviously with a game like Fortnite, the economics are amazing for them because, they're basically just adding more content to this existing thing, and they're very good at audience retention and all that stuff. So I think it's harder to do the thing we're trying to do, but you kind of do the thing that you kind of know how to do and the thing you're passionate about doing.
I don't know. It's important to me that we still do get narrative-driven single-player experiences that do have those kind of moments that are chaotic and unexpected. I hope that people who are only finding those things in multiplayer now, maybe like a younger audience, realizes that there's a lot of cool shit still happening in the single player space, and we kind of sort of collectively figure out how to bring them over to that side too, to have those experiences.
Yeah, I mean, you look at a game like, say, Baldur's Gate, right, which is it is multiplayer too, but really it's that old school thing. And if you give, I think it's really about, can you give a great experience to people? And if you give a great experience to people, and then you can sort of figure out how to make awareness happen of that, right? People will, and now I think people will find things. Like, it's not like Balatro had like a $50 million marketing campaign. Steam reviews are great for that, right? Because then you get, that's what I look at a lot too, right? Is because you get this huge number of people doing reviews, and they're still, I still listen to individual reviewers, who I'm very interested in, but you can get a consensus and that becomes sort of viral. And so Steam has been a great tool to just build awareness for things. But I do think if something's, clair obscura, right? If it's something is good, it will get noticed.
A while back I believe it was on the Xbox Wire podcast, you talked about you were working on a game, I believe during like the PS2 Xbox era, and you guys scrapped it because the tech wasn't there yet. What was that like? Like how sort of important is the technology to you telling the stories you want to tell?
I don't think we've ever been a company that was like, oh my God, we need the latest and greatest technology. Like, like in the rendering space, we've never been a company. Outside of SWAT 4, we never really tried to do ultra realism in our games. It's expensive and it doesn't age as well as sort of more stylistic things, because like Bioshock still looks good, I think, because it wasn't trying to be like to get every nut and bolt like super realistically rendered. It was a stylized, it was still realistic looking sort of, but it was more stylized. So if you look at, say, the Switch 2, and you look at the the new Steam machine coming out, those are not massive technological upgrades, obviously. In fact, that wasn't their strategy. I think people are realizing that we've sort of hit a bit of diminishing returns with that. I think if you have the right art director and the right approach, you don't need to be on the cutting edge of technology all the time. And even the stuff we're doing in Judas is not really, all this sort of narrative stuff we're doing is not CPU intensive. It's work intensive on our side, massive. And Baldur's Gate the same way. Like, there was just a ton of work behind that. None of it was particularly technologically demanding, right? It was just a billion branching tree structures that they had to manage and think about, which I can only tip my hat to those guys, because they did an amazing job with it. But that's not a technological hardware challenge. It's an engineering and thought challenge, and just a huge amount of just work and stuff like that. Judas is just a huge amount of a lot of it's just like organization of the assets and tagging things and looking for certain minor game conditions and combinatorial game conditions to trigger other events that are pretty responsive to player action. So I'm not super worried about if we sort of have plateaued in technology. I don't think that's a big problem. And in fact, it's more important that the hardware get out to more people, I think.
Right.
Because people, they're playing on their phones now, right?
Yeah.
And, then you get things like upscaling and stuff like that, which, sort of really helps out with when you don't have the most powerful machine, and companies are getting more reliant on that. But look, if it continues to grow, technology will find ways to exploit that, and if it plateaus, we'll be comfortable figuring that out. You're asking about that game. That was our first attempt at a console game, and the reason we were making a console game is, at that time, the PC market, the industry always changes.
Right.
The PC market because you used to have to go to the store to buy PC games. They weren't selling well enough, so they were losing all their shelf space. This is right before Steam happened. And we thought PC gaming was dying, and we were freaking out because we had never done a console game before. But look, the world changes. We're game makers. We'll find a way to make games.
I want to look back on the original Bioshock. Before we started shooting today, I was talking with one of our producers here in the room just about what that era was like, getting an Xbox 360, downloading demos for the first time. They weren't on discs that you had to get in a magazine or something like that.
Remember the floppy disks?
Yeah,
PC Gamer?
or any of that. Yeah, getting like shareware that says like, hey, it's the first 3 levels of Doom, and afterwards you got to call this number or like get your dad to mail a check to a company, and 6 months later they'd send you the rest of the game. It's so insane to actually explain that to people now. But I remember getting the original Bioshock demo, which was the opening to the game.
You were born to do great things.
And you're this character in first person, you survive this plane crash, and then you swim to a lighthouse, and then that lighthouse takes you underground to an underwater city, and it just completely blew my mind. It was one of those things where I was like, this is one of the most powerful openings to a video game I'd ever seen. I didn't know the medium could do what it was doing in that moment. And I think Infinite did the exact same thing for me, right? In a different way. You're heading up, and there's a city up there, and all of a sudden, you're in this utopia and things start falling apart. People look back on those as 2 of the most sort of like important, iconic openings of all time. When you were working on those things, did you know what you had in your hands? Did you know that they would go on to become these things that people still talk about?
No, I mean, I really try not to live in the future too much because it's generally a waste of time, right? The most important thing is do something that you love, because if you don't love it first, nobody's ever going to love it.
Right.
And if you do love it, that doesn't necessarily mean other people are going to love it, but if you don't love it. So I'm always trying to please myself first, right? And, but then paying attention to reactions. I talk to the team about it and see what they think. I knew it was important to capture the gamer right away and to really immerse them in that mystery and the WTF of it. If you don't capture, I know this from being a screenwriter, if you don't capture the person reading the script in the first 5 pages, you are screwed.
Right.
And you can have a mediocre middle part or a mediocre ending. If you have a mediocre beginning, you're done. And you shouldn't have a mediocre middle part. You shouldn't have a mediocre ending, but sometimes you screw up, right? Like System Shock 2 had a pretty bad ending, but we had a very strong beginning. And I knew we had to capture people right away, and we spent a lot of time in the opening sequences of our games because everybody will see it. You want to make sure, at least get people so excited up front that they're going to trust you and stick with you. And so the opening is critical to that. And there's a term that's really important to me, which is respecting the player's time.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure that those first few minutes of them, they feel like they're getting way more back than they put in. Mm-hmm. And so we spend infinite amounts of time in the opening of our game.
It feels like it's more important than ever now. I mean, we're both old enough where we remember going to video stores as a kid on a Friday night, and you rent a movie and you bring it home and you watch that movie.
Yep.
And if that movie's not good, you watch that movie because that's the movie. And now, like, you can open up Game Pass and there's like 50 new games. You download 10 of them, maybe you get 30 seconds into one or 5 minutes into the other, and you can actually like rage quit one of those things, back out to the home menu and delete it and then never think about it again. And that's, people worked on that for years. And so like, it's fascinating that you guys had cracked that code way back when Bioshock came out. Like, you just knew, we got to get people hooked right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's true for all storytelling. The beginning is really your most important part. Because if you screw it up, you're kind of done. And especially now, like you said, it's an embarrassment of riches. Like, you and I are old enough that, your friend got a new Atari game and everybody knew about it, right?
Yep.
You went to their house and that was such a huge deal. And whether it was good or not, that's what you had, right? And there was no demos, there was not any of that stuff. And so, yeah, it's a much more competitive environment, and you have to really respect the player's time. You need them more than they need you, right? And so you have to make them feel that you care. and right up front.
Since Infinite, and especially since Bioshock, there's been a lot of like kind of newer games that are clearly inspired by Bioshock and Bioshock Infinite, Bioshock 2, that whole era. And it's been cool to see sort of this new generation of people that very clearly grew up with this type of game. Has it been like fun watching this kind of like next generation of people and game developers kind of latch onto the stuff that you guys were making early on and go, hey, we want to make something like that too?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been inspired and stolen from so many great, films and books and games that I feel that, if anybody can take anything from what we do, that's always very flattering and wonderful because, I think the team feels the same way. The respect of your peers in the industry is very important to people because they know the other developers. They know how hard it is to make various things, and the fact that they'll commit their resource to do something that's somewhat inspired what you do is, very meaningful. They're going to bring their new thing to it too, in the same way we brought our new things to, what we did. So I like anything that we can, expand what the palette of the kind of games we can make, because they'll do something that I'm sure, you'll play something else that's similar, but then they'll have all these new things, and I can play that and maybe learn from that. And It's this really nice reinforcing cycle between game developers, and we're all, and the games industry. I worked in the film industry, and the film industry is extremely, everybody's looking over their shoulders. Everybody's very competitive. Games industry, I can DM and any other developer, and they'll respond to me, and we'll talk about our craft. And I do that sometimes. I'm friends with a bunch of other developers, so I just reach out and say, hey, I really love this, or I really love that. Like I talked to the guys from Dying Light, a couple weeks ago, and I'm friends with Jake Solomon, who did XCOM, and we'll just talk shop.
Yeah.
And everybody's very open, and I always tell people who are trying to get in the industry, if you just DM your heroes, they'll quite often respond to you. It's a very healthy creative industry in that way. It's not ultra competitive with each other. I think we're all very excited about each other. I never feel threatened by anybody else's success because there's always stuff you can learn from them.
Like the rising tide raises all ships type of situation.
Yep.
You are the frog in a pot, boiling so slowly.
One thing we have seen, I think, is that we got 3 Bioshock games in 6 years. And this was back during an era where you would get like a couple of Uncharted games on one console, and you would get, 2 Mario Galaxy games on the Wii or something. Development cycles have stretched. This is not a Judas thing. This is a across the board, across the industry thing. We've seen it happen.
Even Hollow Knight, I think, took 7 years.
Yeah,
the sequel,
yeah. We just got Hollow Knight. I was playing Metroid Prime 4 on the plane ride over here. Development cycles have just gotten longer. What happened? So
I can only really speak for Judas. The reason it took so long is not really related to, rendering technology or anything like that. It's all it was figuring out how we, craft this system, this narrative Lego system that is, combining modular elements together dynamically at runtime to make stories happen. That's very reactive to the player. We have the technology. Then we had to figure out how to write story for that. Like, how do we write stories that maximally leverage that? Because as much as we love the stories from Bioshock and Bioshock Infinite, they are pretty linear experiences, and they're not, outside of the combat and stuff, they're not that highly reactive to player action in the same way. And I really want to do a game that was, sort of the opposite end of the spectrum from that. And so first we're just doing the raw technology, something we built on top of Unreal Engine. And then there was, okay, how do we write for this? How do we build encounters for this? And we kissed many, many, many frogs along the way. And time just was passing.
Right.
And it's I get it's a long time, and it seems like a hugely long time. I'm not sure how we would have kissed those frogs any faster. I think for other games, it's hard to say. I'm not at those studios. I mean, some of it I'm sure is the scope of the games increase, and they just get bigger and bigger. And when you increase the scopes of the game, there's exponential effects on everything. Like, you have more people, and more people means more communication problems. And then just, I'm sure, Metroid, I don't know much what happened there, but you start with one team and then it's not working out, and they swap teams, and that is sets you, it's not like you pick up from the bookmark they left off, right? Because they're probably going to want to do a different thing, the new team, because they're different people. Especially looking at somebody else's code base, it's generally WTF. And because it's different, and you don't have if you do or don't have access to those people, you're scratching your head. And everything that happens in a game happens because it's coded to happen, or systems are combining in emergent ways to happen. But there's no, like in the real world, you throw a cup and it lands and it behaves according to physics. That just works. Nothing just works in games.
Right.
Just making the most simple things happen. If its game is architected in a way that wasn't needed originally, you may have to re-architect major underlying systems. That could just take a long time. So sometimes you think, maybe we won't capture 100% of the work that the team was working on before, maybe 75%, and it's really probably like 20. And sometimes it's less because you just spent all this time trying to do what they were doing exactly, and it just doesn't suit the new thing you're doing. My hope is with the next game, we've built all the rudiments of the functions for Judas, and now more importantly, we know how to use it,
right?
And what works well and what doesn't, because it is a very different model than what we've done before. It's going to deliver an experience I think our gamers will be. It's a first-person shooter in a deeply immersive environment with great characters and all that stuff, but the underpinnings of how it works are radically different because of the stuff we wanted to do differently in the game. And just getting our heads around that and how to write for that was just really different for me, because I hadn't written a game that before that where you had those kind of big radical shifts. Like in Bioshock 1, you have moments like depending on how you treat the little sisters, when you arrive at the little sister base with Tenenbaum, it's different depending on what you've done, but that's two different states basically, and that's one of the biggest deltas in the game.
You have saved many of my little ones. I owe you a debt.
You try to do a whole game like that, and you realize, you have to architect everything differently. And then you get down the road and you built a system, and they're like, well, I assumed as the creative director, it did this, but I hadn't spec'd it out with the programmers well enough, and it turns out it doesn't. I think you're completely right. I don't know exactly everything that's happened, but I can tell you why it happened to us, and I can speculate as to why it happened to others.
Do you think part of it is the sort of diminishing returns thing we talked about, in terms of like there's a level of visual fidelity that the audiences, there's an expectation of like you need these 8K puddles. Like, do you think that maybe if we all collectively got to a point where we're okay with games looking this good right here forever, we would get more games faster?
I mean, is it I don't think actually games have gotten radically better looking in the past few years. In fact, part of the problem of the scope and scale of the game, there are some games that had an iteration 10 years ago that sometimes looks better than a more recent iteration. And part of that is, as game teams expand, you probably bring on more less experienced people sometimes. And I think you've had maybe some situations where people who were less experienced were put in roles they weren't entirely ready for yet. And so that can have an impact on length of development time too, because experience is, there's two ends of experience. There's this thing, System Shock 2 was the first game and I had no experience. I never shipped a game before. And there's this term I didn't invent called the genius of the novice, is you don't know the rules. So sometimes you can break it without even knowing you're breaking it. And you do really innovative, cool things because you're a novice. But then as you get more experience, sometimes you get stuck.
Right.
And sometimes it's good to, have that novice brain in your head, but the downside of being a novice is you don't know anything, right? So I remember there's a level in System Shock 2 where I wanted you to go on the surface of the spaceship and have a zero-G environment. And I'm just I told my co-founders, who are both programmers and very, very smart and very good game designers, I'm like, hey, we should do this one level where you're in zero-G. And they're like, Ken? No, you have no idea what that would involve. Now I understand, but sometimes that knowledge can constrain you. So there's value in having young people and new people on the team. There's also there's also a huge amount of value in experience, and you just have to make sure in the team that the people are in the right roles. And so I do think that there was a large influx of new people, because you remember when IGN started, when I started in the industry. So you guys were in 90.
Yeah, 30 years ago. Yeah.
And I'm 30. This is my 30th year in the industry as well.
We started specifically to follow your work.
That's right.
And then we built a business.
I created a huge amount of demand. when I was in my first year.
You talked about pitching an idea and everyone's sort of being like, no way. But what happens to you personally when there's an idea? you're working on it for weeks, maybe months, and then ultimately you're like, this doesn't fit. What's that like for you to kind of say goodbye to something that you were sort of creatively, impassioned about and connected to, and ultimately didn't fit the larger vision and had to cut?
I was very lucky when I started in the games industry. I was working with the guy Doug Church, and we worked on the thing together that became Thief. Before it was Thief, it was 40 other things, and I was basically writing an entire pitch document every week, essentially, and getting concept art made for a different game concept, or every week, every 2 weeks. And I did 5 or 6 of those, and we'd talk about it for a while, and then at some point he'd say, I don't know. And I got my heart broken a bunch. The idea eventually evolved into the thing that became Thief, and I look back and I'm like, Thief was a much better idea than any of the other stuff we had before. Mm-hmm. And it immediately taught me something about my own work, which was ideas are cheap, right?
Prophecy is my business, Mr. DeWitt. As blood is yours.
The thing I would not do when you contact your favorite game developer is to have a great idea for a game. Because ideas really don't matter. Execution is everything. And sometimes your idea hits execution. And listen, I've kissed many frogs along the way on every project, especially Judas. And I have no problem saying goodbye to things if they're not working. It takes me longer sometimes than I wish it did to figure that out, but I basically never think about it again. Or if I do, I joke about it. Like, hey, remember that genius idea I had that actually turned out to be absolutely terrible?
Yep.
I wish I had abandoned it sooner, but ideas you can come up with constantly. That's not the hard part. It's getting it good and putting it in front of an audience and having them feel it. And how does it feel? And how does it smell? And how does it taste, right? That's the stuff where it really comes together. Ideas are meaningless.
I guess to build on that, there's this sort of what is it? Perfectionism's the enemy of good or whatever. Is that a thing that do you feel like you kind of butt your head against sometimes? Or?
The problem is you never know.
Right.
And you do have to question yourself a lot. There are definitely times where I probably have a standard which is not necessary, and knowing when that is the tricky part, right? Like we're getting now to the point in Judas where we're getting towards that end process, right? And trying to finish the game. You do have to realize that sometimes the standards you have for every single thing can't be up here because people aren't going to notice, right? And if you're spending a ton of time on stuff people don't notice, you do have to have a conversation with yourself that is about, am I right here? And that's a hard conversation to have, but I have it every day. And sometimes I have it more successfully and sometimes I have it less successfully. I know I have a reputation for, saying, I don't think that's working. But one thing I do have, I think if I have one skill set, I think that's my strongest, is when I play the game as a gamer, not as the creative director. To some degree, I'm famously known for being not very good at games in the company, even though I play nonstop. I'm constantly playing. I've never gotten good, but it's okay because I mostly play single player games. But I'm also famous for breaking the game because I play the game as a gamer, not as a game developer. And
right.
So you could have QA people and the developer themselves who have played it a ton, but they're playing it the way they think it should be played. Sometimes, though, that perfectionist gamer in me can be a bit, and knowing when you're doing that is very, very, very difficult. As the game gets closer to ship, you have to develop that skill set because eventually you have to sign off on things.
Right.
And so I'm signing off on a lot of things now because we're getting closer to that point. And you start realizing, okay, is somebody just picking on this thing, or is it really a problem? And sometimes it's like, I'm just picking on it. But you want every nut and bolt to be perfect.
Sure.
There's a lot of nuts and bolts, so not every one could be 10,000%. So you decide what has to be 10,000%. And you decide when 100% is good enough.
But I'm here to set you free, whether you like it or not.
You mentioned players potentially not even noticing a specific system or a thing that you worked really hard on. But a thing you're doing with Judas is you're designing an experience that they might miss entire parts of something that you worked on really hard. Your whole team got together for weeks, months, years, and made a thing that a player might not see on a playthrough because of their specific actions or decisions. What's that like? How do you reconcile because there's all working on all this stuff and putting it all on the table and everyone gets to see it and enjoy it. But then there's also we worked on this thing and somebody might just miss it or not even see it.
I've always appreciated that. I think playing Baldur's Gate, I really understood the power of that. Like I played a second playthrough and like one of the main characters got killed.
Yeah.
Like very early because I only knew he was a major character from my previous playthrough. And then like I did something different and he was gone and I saw his dead body there. And it was so powerful to see that happen that any frustration that I have with people not seeing stuff immediately became, I can't wait for people to realize, talking to their friends and realize the huge things they maybe didn't encounter.
That they missed, yeah.
That's very incentivizing to play the game again.
Yep.
And I don't want people, like our previous games, you know, I always have this thing where you knew Elizabeth really well in Bioshock Infinite, but she didn't really know you as a gamer. She didn't really, and we wanted her to at one point, but I realized the system I had built, like I wanted her, at some point in the middle of Infinite, I was like, it would be amazing if like Elizabeth could watch all the violence you're doing and be like, no, I'm done with you. And then I realized there's no way in a million years. And that was the thought that led me to Judas, where you really had to have the game be highly reactive. That meant you were going to have tons of stuff the player wasn't going to see on their first playthrough potentially. And we realized that and we really dove in and embraced that. And the team we have that conversation all the time. Like, hey, is a player going to even know X, you know, when we're talking about a certain story beat? And the answer is quite often, you know, not necessarily no. And you have to account for that. But I think because of the experience I've had with emergence and player choice, I don't have a heartbreak about people not seeing content in the game because there's something so powerful about that.
It kind of feels like you get back from a trip to a cool city and your friend's like, did you go to this thing? And you're like, no. And they're like, oh man, you got to go back. Right. So is the hope sort of people will play through Judas and then they'll have these conversations and they'll go like, hey, I want to kind of re-roll, or I want to go back in there and I want to do this, and this time I'm going to play like this, or I'm going to connect with this character instead of this character and double cross this character.
It's way, way, way more replayable than our previous games, and I'm thrilled. Like generally, game completion rate is pretty low.
Right.
Even like back in Bioshock 1 days, I think Bioshock had like a 50-something percent, because you only knew from achievements with the game. So I think on Xbox you had about a 50% completion rate, which is pretty high.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of games have like 10 or 15. And so I felt very fortunate that sometimes people would replay the game and there wasn't much to get out of replaying the game because it was going to be, on large part, very similar to the first time you play. You have like little sister harvesting and things which could be different. The juice is worth the squeeze because it gives the people that experience of going back. And I think Judas offers, even just from a gameplay standpoint too, like the tool set and the player tool set and the amount of tools you have and the different kinds of builds you can do are just so different than our previous games, you know, and the choices you can make is going to really reward that. But even if you don't replay, just having that conversation with your friend is powerful. And as you said, I think it's also a great incentive to make people, to excite people to replay the game.
Your mission has failed, Tom. The flesh was not meant to survive on Proxima.
Now, there's still room for you in the mission, Neffy, I swear.
Don't you ever call me that again.
You're almost on the other side of this game now, right? You're almost at the part where people are experiencing it. And it's been a while since you've been on the other side of that. And when that happens, what's that like for you? Like when Infinite came out and it was like, pencils down, we can't work on this anymore. This is a boxed copy. People are buying it. They're getting the collector's edition. You know, they're getting tattoos and stuff like that. They're connecting with these characters, and you get to sit back and look at years of work. It's done. This is the world's now. What's that feeling like for you?
I'm not a woman, so I never had a baby, obviously, but I think there is something similar to the postpartum depression thing. Because one thing about making a game, especially near the end, your life is really structured. You are going in every day. It is intense. Your whole brain is taken up by this. And then suddenly, one day it's just done. Like you said, pencils down. And all of a sudden your life is radically different. And most jobs aren't like that, right? Most jobs you go, you're not, like movie, you know, big piece of art are like that, but even movies, they're, you know, for most people, it's a few months on the movie. You know, for some people, like the director and writer may be on for years, but
sure.
But often they're doing other things too. They have other things going. When I make a game, I'm just on this game, and your life just radically changes the next day. You know, I'm sure like, you know, you're pregnant and you're carrying this baby. That's one whole set of challenges and joys. And the next day you've got a kid, and you're a dad. You've been through this.
Yeah.
And your life is just radically shifts in one day, and it takes a while for your brain to catch up. And I struggle usually at the end of projects because you're excited about the new thing, but you're also, your entire flow of what your life is like radically shifts all of a sudden.
Because you wake up the Monday after the game's out in the wild and people, there's reviews out and people are playing it, there's Steam reviews and you're reading them, but you come into work and you're like, who am I today, right? Like, what's next?
Yeah, and you also have this thing that you have total power over one day, and then once it's out, it's not yours anymore.
Right.
It takes you a couple of months to get going on what's next and get your head around it.
Do you think being aware of that this time around, you might allow yourself a little more like victory lap?
I don't really know how to take a victory lap. Like, I don't like read a ton of articles or retrospectives or YouTube videos about the old games I worked on. I kind of move on to the next thing generally. The real reward for me is getting the funding to make these toys. And so that's really where I find the most value, because it gives my life meaning and purpose in a way that, my dog gives my life meaning and purpose, my wife gives my life meaning and purpose, my friends. But the thing I spend a lot of my time on is this, making these little, toys. And they give me a lot of meaning. But I don't go back and I don't replay them really. I sometimes watch videos to remember like how we handled a certain problem, because sometimes you don't want to resolve the same problem. But I don't spend a lot of time like, playing the hits.
Where am I?
Back in the land of the living.
There's a perception in this industry that people are just churning out products to sell, and ultimately it is, right? It's this sort of mix between art and business. It's just wonderful to hear that there are people who are like, I just genuinely thrive in the creative process.
Sometimes when I get anxious or depressed or something, I go, right, because the world, you feel like you don't have a lot of power in, like some people, I have more power than some people, but like there's a whole world moving around which I have no say over, and that can be very scary and frustrating at times. But the game world, when I'm writing a character, I'm going to write what I control that, right? And so there's a real sense of control when you're making something like this that you don't normally have in your normal life. Like, you get sick, your friends get sick, whatever, your family. You have so little control in life, but here there's a ton of control. And it's really powerful, and it's very good for my brain.
A man chooses, a slave obeys.
You tackle a lot of themes that I think people don't necessarily want to go near. In games specifically, I think. You deal with a lot of things about sort of like failed, crumbling utopias, and false prophets, fanaticism, and all this other stuff. And I feel like there's been a conversation over the last few years where people are like, games should stay away from these type of themes. What makes you want to tackle those things? And I guess like sort of what do you say to people who are like, that's hands off on those themes?
Like everything, I think it's execution. I don't like set out to write a polemic about anything. I talk about, generally I'm writing about what I'm currently interested in at the time, right? Bioshock I had read, and a few years before, and I just thought there were some interesting themes to explore about, an entirely deregulated state. And look, I'm a capitalist myself. Like I think the system is, I think it was Ben Franklin said about democracy, it's a worse system except all the other ones.
Instead, I chose something different. I chose the impossible.
I like challenging my own beliefs, right? That's one thing I do. So to some degree, I'm writing as a conversation with myself about some things I believe sometimes too. Less so in Columbia, but I think that's to some degree why Comstock wasn't as good as a villain as Ryan was, because I felt more of connection to Ryan, but I also like challenging him in a way Rand wouldn't challenge her characters in her books. I never set out to educate people or to tell them the truth. And I think the problem with trying to do that is it's not interesting dramatically.
Right.
And I think what people are responding to, and legitimately, is being lectured to.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to be lectured to. I'd much rather ask questions than answer them, because what the hell do I know, right? Really? And I've been wrong in my life before, so I'm not comfortable telling people I have the answers. I like exploring the questions. So I tend to create a canvas. The team and I, create a broad, especially in this game, a really broad canvas to talk about things we're interested in. And we spend half our time in the writer's room just talking about this particular philosophy or this particular moment in history or politics or something like that. What's interesting about that? And what are the interesting questions about it, more than like this character is purely the hero and they have all the right ideas. And I don't write a lot of characters like that. I write pretty dysfunctional characters because I'm writing people I know, right? I'm writing myself, I'm writing people I know. And so I think if you're going to do it, if you want to venture into politics, I think there's some people who say all games are political, right?
Sure.
Which is, yeah, if all games are political, no games are political.
Then,
right?
then nothing is.
Yeah, it's the Incredibles quote, right? If everybody's special, nobody's special.
Yeah.
Speaking of objectivism, right? That's the most objectivist 3D movie ever made. If you're going to deal with this, you really have to, I think, go in with a honest, questioning, open heart, and find the humanity in people, even in the evil that people do, right? Because everybody's the hero of their own story, and generally, like Judas focused a lot on the best of intentions and what can happen even with people with the best of intentions, what evil can come from that. I like exploring those questions and seeing how things can go wrong, how things can go right, but we never try to lecture people because A, it's not my place, B, it's also dramatically sterile.
We're in an era now where like so much of the pop culture we consume is celebrating anti-heroes, right? Some of the biggest TV and movie characters over the last decades have been people who are like, yeah, you went, Walter White, that seemed like a good thing to raise all that money to cure your cancer. And then, and you became a monster. And so, I think that's a much more interesting approach.
That's a great example. His spoiler alert, but his whole time he's saying, I'm doing it for the best of intentions, I'm doing it for my family. And then finally, when he changes at the end, he has his moment of pseudo redemption. His wife says to him, if you say don't tell me it's about the family. And he finally goes, no, I did it for myself.
Yeah.
And that's a moment of self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
I did it for me.
But he had through that good intention thing, as cover, he made this monster of himself. And that's why that show works. I think that show knew, and The Sopranos knew, even Mad Men knew that Draper and Walter and Tony were not great people, right? A lot of times you see characters now that seem amoral. The show doesn't seem to understand that they're amoral. That creates a weird tension too, but it also makes those shows not work as well. So I do think the age of the anti-heroes kind of disappeared, and the age of the heroes actually is an anti-hero, but they don't know they're an anti-hero in the movie or TV show doesn't seem to know they're an anti-hero. It's been really more of the last 10 years, and we'll see. Also, that tends to be less dramatically interesting because it's not honest about the characters. Like Vince Gilligan was totally honest about who Walter White was, and he was brilliant because he allowed you to see there was some goodness in him. Like his relationship with Jesse was often incredibly dark, but right from the beginning, he does develop this sort of bond with him. Of course, he also brutalizes him and in many, many ways, but in the end, he sacrifices his life for him. But the show clearly knew who Walter was, and if you don't know who your character is really, then you can't really write them. And if you're dishonest about the character, or you don't see the obvious flaws, and you don't have the show recognize it, you're going to have problems. Again, it's not a moral thing. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying it tends to be dramatically inert.
Do you think that like games give you a sort of better playground for a situation like that, considering you can ultimately funnel in several different optional endings rather than just like when The Sopranos ended, you mentioned it's like everyone was mad at that moment, right? They're like, what do you mean? Like the screen went to black. But with Bioshock and Bioshock Infinite and stuff like that, like your actions ultimately funnel into a series of different endings. And are you drawn to that?
Jack in Bioshock has one line. He has one line at the beginning of the game.
They told me, son, you're special. You were born to do great things.
When you have a character where there's not a lot of choice, it's very hard to write dialogue for that character because you never want to say anything. Like if Booker goes, I also am super racist and I hate all these people, it would be difficult for the player to continue that because if they were able to decide to do that for whatever reason, then you can have the character reflect that. So Booker spoke way more than Jack did.
That idiot priest needs to learn the difference between baptizing a man and drowning one.
But we always had to be very careful because of the lack of choice in the game that we weren't just sort of making him make big statements that the player, because that you can create a dissonance between the player and the character. With Judas, it's tricky to write too because she is way more vocal. The reason it's called Judas is because it's about her, right? It's about you as her and how you choose to inhabit her. But the nice thing about having all the choice in the game is we can now write more directly because if the players made a choice, we're informed by that choice. So we can write, if they chose to help Hope versus Tom in this situation, we can have her say something positive about hope because we're looking at the player choice. So we have to write a lot more dialogue, of course, because you have to reflect all those states. But that allows us to have a much more vocal main character, because you don't want to create the dissonance between the character and the player. And that's very tough to do, and especially if they're going to be talking a lot.
What if I told you that every word you say is being recorded?
Was it tough to say goodbye to Bioshock and kind of leave it behind? It was your baby for so long, and it's ultimately in other people's hands now.
I was very incredibly fortunate to have a franchise that people cared about. It's very important to me. Like, I've got a giant Big Daddy in my living room. I've got toys and stuff around. It's very, very important to me. I didn't have a lot else to say in that world. So a franchise is an interesting thing because it can come to own you if you're not careful, right? Like, it can define you. It was scary and risky and kind of crazy to walk away from a very successful franchise. I didn't do it because I didn't love the franchise. I did it because I didn't want to just make a new thing and call it that because that would be safer. I wanted to step away and challenge myself in a different way and challenge the team in a different way. Things can own you if you hold them too tightly rather than the other way around. And I will always love it, and I can't wait to see what they do, with it. But I always struggled to, like, what exactly is a Bioshock game? Like, even when we started making Infinite, I was like, what is a Bioshock game? Because it's so weird, It is a first-person shooter, yeah, but it's not. The goal is we can't just be like, okay, now we're going to drop, a new setting and a new war. And that works really well for Call of Duty, but we didn't have that option. So just figuring out what it was, and then you're sort of bound by certain expectations that people have, reasonable expectations that gamers would have in a Bioshock game. But I don't really, even if you ask me to define what a Bioshock game is, I couldn't really even tell you exactly. I guess it's sort of based in history, right? That's probably one thing. It's slightly alternate history or fairly alternate history, but still really bound in historical periods. And I think you couldn't really do a game in the future necessarily. I mean, at least I didn't have a way to do it. Somebody could figure it out. Certainly there's a lot of DNA in Judas of our legacy, a lot. But people are also gonna be surprised how different it is. I did worry that this would just be the rest of my life, and it felt like, I may look back and be like, that was the dumbest thing I ever did. But I'm fortunate that I'm not, I've made enough, I've had enough success where I don't need to, money's not the most important thing. It's challenging myself and coming to work and working with brilliant people on hard problems is really what gets me going in the morning. And so I wanted a new hard problem, and we got one.
IGN turns 30 this year. It's making us reflect a lot on the last 30 years of games. What's a moment from one of your games that you're sort of proudest of? The thing that, when you think about it, you're like, man, we nailed that.
I mean, System Shock 2 was powerful for me, just as the first game I ever shipped. Thief was important because the process, figuring out what it does to come up with a game idea and go through all that rejection period and build a world that would work in a game, that was challenging. System Shock 2 was leading, the creative side of the project when I had very, very little experience. I think by the time I got to Bioshock, the Would You Kindly moment certainly, the opening and the Would You Kindly moment were because I didn't expect the Would You Kindly moment people to really get it. There was a meta commentary there, which I knew people would get the sort of, I'm a sleeper agent. I didn't even know it. I didn't realize they would get the sort of meta commentary about agency in games.
Would you kindly? Powerful phrase. Familiar phrase.
And that was really exciting. That, because, everybody likes to have your weird pseudo-intellectual ideas be recognized, but also I think it showed a sophistication in the audience that people didn't expect, that people could recognize this sort of meta commentary. And we did it without breaking the fourth wall. It wasn't like a postmodernist moment where we broke context. It was embedded into the story, and I was very happy and pleased about, not just because what we did, because it just made me feel great about game. But I think people had misinterpreted gamers for a long time, and they thought they just wanted to say Thing Go Boom, and there's nothing wrong with Thing Going Boom. I love Thing Going Boom. I play plenty of Thing Going Boom games. I think people had to at least start to recognize that gamers are interested in a much broader range of things that people thought they were. And Infinite, I think, relationship with Elizabeth and the ending especially, we hadn't done great endings before, and I really wanted to do a great ending. And so the ending of that is one of my favorite things we worked on.
You chose to walk away, but in other oceans, you didn't. You took the baptism, and you were born again as a different man.
Calm, stop.
It all has to end to have never started. Not just in this world, but in all of ours.
Smother him in the crib.
Smother, 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 smother.
Ken, thank you so much, man. This was phenomenal. It's an honor to finally sit down and talk to you about this. I do have a funny story about the ending of Infinite, by the way. I was working at the old IGN San Francisco office right when the game was about to come out. And I'd been waking up before work every morning, making a pot of coffee and playing a bit of Infinite. And I had maybe like an hour left in the game based on what some of my coworkers were telling me. And I came into work, sat down at my desk, and I hear a couple coworkers behind me openly describing the ending of the game.
And before you had played it?
Before I had finished it. I had just a little bit left. And I turn around and I'm like, hey, keep it down. I haven't finished Bioshock Infinite yet. And the person talking to my coworker was you. And I just looked, and I was like, that visit, yeah. And I was like, you know what? If there's anyone that's going to spoil the end of Bioshock Infinite for me, Ken Levine's okay.
Who's that annoying douchebag who's talking about the ending of Infinite?
So
sorry, did I spoil it?
No, it was great. It was great. I think I cut off just at the right moment.
That's really funny.
Then went home that day from work, finished the game, loved it, and yeah, the rest is history. So thank you for sitting down with us. Thank you for supporting IGN and being part of our story. And I hope you get to keep making cool forever.
Thank you. And I've been a fan of the site since the inception, when it was a rough newcomer on the scene, and especially because it was online, right? That was pretty new. So thanks for including me in this.